The state of Illinois has been without a budget for close to 11 months, which means a lot of states' bills just aren't getting paid. And the cuts are starting to reach dramatic proportions, especially with social services. And before we dismiss it as just politics as usual with a governor fighting with the legislature, we have to acknowledge there are real people feeling very real consequences. Tonight, is the Illinois budget crisis doing damage to the St. Louis region? Stay tuned.
So we're going to do the show.
Stay tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation, and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media in Grand Center, this is Stay Tuned. There's a budget battle going on in Springfield, and the residents of the state are the ones feeling the pinch. In the center are Republican Governor Bruce Rauner and a veto-proof Democratic legislature, which has led to both sides holding steady and unable to approve a budget for 2016. Days away from the legislative session close, both sides still seem far apart on the issues, and every organization that relies on state aid or does business with the state is left in limbo and wondering when or if the next check will come. Without the budget, social service agencies have made cuts, state universities have laid off staff, and public services like transit have been cut or in some places stopped altogether. Child care assistance eligibility has been trimmed by 90%. The young and old and everyone in between are feeling the effects. How can the state move forward? And is it already too late to save some of these social services? And we have in the studio tonight with us people who see the effects of these cuts firsthand, the effects of this budget that we have yet to see firsthand. But before we talk to the folks in the studio tonight, we want to kind of get a good baseline update from Springfield, from Illinois Public Radio's Amanda Vinicky. She spoke with our producer, Justin Hartman, earlier today.
Amanda Vinicky, thank you for joining us. As the State House Bureau Chief of Illinois Public Radio, you cover the ins and outs of Springfield on a daily basis. On one side, you have the Republican Governor Bruce Rauner, and on the other side, a Democratic legislator. Both seem unwilling to budge in this budget battle. There hasn't been a budget for 11 months. How is the state going to get everything done with this budget impasse?
Well, when you said getting everything done, I guess that is the big question in Illinois. Will, in fact, the legislature and governor reach a deal and get a budget done for last year and for the new year that begins July 1st? Or are they going to have yet another year where there is no true spending plan in place? So on Wednesday evening, we did see the Illinois House pass a budget with just Democratic votes, although even some Democrats were against it and Republicans really pushing hard. The governor already says he'll veto it, so its chances in the Senate are uncertain. This is a sort of repeat of what Democrats who hold majorities in the General Assembly did last year. They passed a budget that's out of balance. They say they're willing to do revenue and want the governor to get on board. They say he's just trying to force them to wear the jacket for a tax hike, which would be, electoral suicide. And then the governor says it's Democrats who aren't compromising on these changes he believes will make the economy better. He says a tax increase alone won't help Illinois. It'll just bring Illinois back into what he's termed a death spiral.
The session is getting close to coming to an end. What happens if nothing is agreed upon by the end of the session?
Well, in a little bit of time, I'm going to be off to hear Governor Bruce Rauner, where I expect he will have some not so laudatory remarks for the Democrats, and we could see more of that ahead. There are rank and file legislators from both parties, from both the House and the Senate, that have been meeting in private, and they are discussing these quote unquote turnaround agenda elements that I talked about, basically the governor's plan for Illinois. And maybe we will see compromise. So there are still some folks who are holding out that it could happen. Otherwise, I think you're going to see a lot of, gnashing of teeth, wringing of hands, and the works as Illinois continues down this really tumultuous time that has hurt a lot of people, particularly the vulnerable and some of the state universities. You look at the regional schools that aren't huge, and that would be, for example, Western Illinois, Eastern, and Southern Illinois University. That they're hurting because the state didn't come through for really 10 months with any money, and now they're just getting a portion of what they're supposed to receive. And they say students are leaving, going to schools across the border, such as in Missouri.
Has anything like this ever happened before? What happens next?
This really is uncharted water. What happens may be a continuation of what has occurred now, and that is a lot of court decrees have continued spending in some areas. So we expect that that will continue unless there is some sort of upheaval in the judicial system, or one of these lawsuits breaks through, for example, one that's allowing state employees to get paid. Maybe that will turn the tide. Maybe Illinois legislators come back all summer as they did last year and continue to fight it out or what have you, or maybe they go home. There's, of course, an election ahead in November, and wait to see if they can come back and get it done when some of that immediate political pressure is off. A lot of this is about a battle of wills between the governor and the really powerful Democratic House Speaker. Could be seen as a just very different points of view in terms of a path forward. One is more pro-labor, the other is anti-union, or it could all be just politics. I'm kind of guessing that it is a combination of all three.
Thank you, Amanda Vinicky from Illinois Public Radio, for joining us just before you start another day covering the end of the legislative session. Good luck today.
Thank you, Louis. See what he says. Appreciate it. You too.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Justin. And we'd like to invite you to join in on this as well. Find us with hashtag StayTunedSTL. We've heard from you throughout the week. We'd like to hear from you throughout tonight's show. I'm pleased to welcome to the studio three guests who can fill us in on more of the human aspect of all of what we just talked about tonight, and the fact that we might, as Amanda said, be stretching potentially into the second year of no budget. Let me do some introductions quickly here. Bill Krieb, CEO, Leslie Bates Davis, Neighborhood House. Thanks for being here. Joy Paith, CEO of Age Smart Community Resources, and Evan Kraus, Director of Eastside Aligned. Bill, I'll start with you, but this is a question for all of you. Is this are we looking at politicians and politics that kind of make you roll your eyes, or is it more serious than that?
Well, it's extremely serious. It's really a crisis situation for thousands of children, families, elderly people throughout the state. The budget pass has really impacted probably the most vulnerable, the poorest, the most isolated families that we work with in the greater East St. Louis, St. Clair County area. For example, one of the programs that was not funded was the Teen Reach program, which is an after-school program. I know one of the mothers, Mary, she works over here in St. Louis, and she doesn't get back over to the east side till maybe 6:30 or 7. So the Teen Reach program provided important after-school safe haven for her children, and that program was not funded. Not just in East St. Louis, but hundreds of Teen Reach programs throughout the state were not funded and have closed. We've been pretty fortunate. We're a member of the United Way. The United Way has really stepped up to help us and some other agencies during this difficult time. So we've been able to keep about 2/3 of that program going. But still, it's, we've had to lay off staff. We've had to lay off almost 140 staff over the last 6 months, and that's had a devastating impact, on the families that we serve.
Yeah, and to put that in perspective, you have how large is your staff?
About 220.
So more than half.
Right.
Jumping ahead just a little bit in the conversation, then we'll come back to what you just mentioned there, that this is a woman who's working in St. Louis and depending on your service in Illinois, that sometimes we start to think that problems and issues stop and start at the river. But is this a regional problem?
Absolutely. Because of so much overlap of where working families, get their means to provide. And many of the programs that have not been funded are prevention-based programs, and some of those are to prevent delinquent behavior. And that certainly can cross the river. There's no boundary when it comes to crime and violence. That's one example.
So back up to more examples of what we're seeing. Tell me how is this affecting people in a real way on a daily basis?
Well, we are at a critical point, and right now for older adults, which is who we serve, there's no transportation services anymore. So if you're in an area where you don't have public transit or the ability to access a bus, you're stuck in your home. So if you need dialysis, how do you get there? You have to depend on your friends or neighbors if you have no relatives. That's a critical life-saving thing. So if you don't go to dialysis, soon you'll die. I mean, that's the only option. So if there's no way out of your house, you have some serious issues. And that's been a real problem in our region, is this whole issue of how do we get people to where they need to be.
You know, I think the crisis for us is we're, as a multi-purpose agency, we work with a lot of other agencies. And as Evan said, you know, the real catastrophe is that so many of the programs we serve actually are saving the state money. And for example, like the Redeploy Illinois, which is provided through the Children's Home and Aid Society, you know, for about $5,000 a year, it keeps kids in the community. If they end up being incarcerated, it costs the state $100,000. Just like the services that Joy provides, you know, we provide services that keep our seniors here in the community. If they end up having to be placed in a nursing home, again, it costs, you know, 10 times more than it would to keep them in the community. So, you know, it's hard to understand from even a budgeting standpoint why they would choose not to fund these programs that are actually so cost effective for the taxpayers, you know, in Illinois. And so, you know, this is why we're trying to push, hey, get a budget passed and let's save the taxpayers some money.
Is it getting worse? Are the problems compounding the longer we go on?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think we're hearing about how severe it is enough. But I think coming real soon, as some agencies are going to be seen closing their doors more, and these aren't just the nonprofit agencies, we're talking governmental functional organizations, one of them being health districts. There are health districts that provide everything from scanning food to make sure that restaurants are doing it, providing vaccinations and immunizations, where we currently don't have in the East St. Louis area the right chemicals to spray to prevent mosquitoes. Now, Amanda Vinicky just today tweeted saying we had our first case of the West Nile virus in Illinois through a mosquito. Well, our area is unprotected, and we're not the only area in the state that's now unprotected by that.
You know, couple other programs that come to my mind are one is we work with the Catholic Urban Programs that runs the only homeless shelter in the East St. Louis area. They haven't been paid a dime since July, and so they're really struggling to keep their place open. We work with St. Vincent de Paul, which provides burial for the poor. There's been no money under the Burial for the Poor program, and so I know in the last 3 months about 18 of the people that have come had to be cremated simply because the families didn't have any money to pay for burials. So it's really impacting a lot of families and just having a devastating impact on the people we serve.
The most vulnerable, are they impacted the most? You're talking about it potentially is going to start reaching all of us, I guess, if you want to put it that way, but are the most vulnerable at the most risk?
Actually, they are, and it's really interesting because of the way that the state's funded some things, but not all things. And we're here at the table, we're like that small percentage of services that haven't been funded. Why, I don't know. Why are we not funding services for older adults? When Bill was talking about this is a cost saving if we can keep people in their home, we're trying to raise $575,000. That will say that if we can keep people in their homes with that money, that's the money we need. If they go into a nursing home, it's $7 million. That doesn't make any sense. And people want to be in their home and not have to use an institution if they don't have to. But that's their only option at this point.
And it certainly isn't just impacting, you know, small organizations, but, you know, everybody from, you know, Jewish Family Services to Catholic Social Services to Lutheran Family Services, all in from Chicago down to Cairo. I mean, some of those agencies have laid off 750 people. Catholic Social Service, I think, was 1,000 people they had to lay off. So, you know, the numbers of people having to be laid off. And then when you think about, you know, if a budget is passed, then you have to talk about retraining those people. And those people were dedicated people who, you know, gave a lot of their lives. Now, you know, they're gone. It's going to cost even more money to try to retrain them and bring those people back who were doing a great job. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to look at the impact of the budget impasse.
We saw a lot of people that were providing services, and they knew that their organization was on shaky ground and they weren't getting funded, so they went across the river to Missouri for a similar job. So their organization was left with no money to hire a new person and open positions, so they no longer provided the service. So the service was gone.
Of course, if you listen to the governor and some of the folks who agree with his steadfast strategy, he says on Twitter recently, he said, in case you missed it, Illinois needs meaningful reforms to create jobs and grow the economy. Illinois, you know, the budget I think he was handed last time was, you know, well in the hole to begin with. Someone retweeted back at him and commented and said, this person said she helps people get jobs every day, but with no Illinois budget, she can't help. And then she went on to use the hashtag no budget, no jobs. There's this kind of ideological battle going on. I mean, some people might say some of the services that are provided by people in your arena would be better off not having government in that role, and we should be stepping up with our nonprofits. Are we in the middle of a retooling of just the way things happen in Illinois, and it's just going to be painful?
So many of the cuts have been made around programs that are typically referred to as prevention-based programs. And that's one way to look at them, to prevent issues from occurring. But another lens to look at them is their preparation programs, preparing people to be equipped for their education and for the workforce. And that's one of the things that I don't think is being focused on, is how we're talking about what's not being cut, or rather what's not being maintained. One of the things I looked at is when you talk about a fundamental duty of our elected officials, I had to go to the Constitution of the state of Illinois. And in the preamble, one of the things that they are mandated to do is provide opportunity for the fullest development of the individual of the states. And all of these programs that are being cut would have fulfilled this core belief and this core value that enacts us as a state. And so there is a reframing that needs to happen, but also an understanding of how much we are going to be impacted if we are not preparing the future of the society. Among the vulnerable populations are our children. And we, frankly, don't have the tool to measure the depth of impact that is on them now and for the days to come. The trauma that is coming from the fact that their parents who may need medical prescriptions for mental illness is not getting it, and they're living with someone who may have bipolar or schizophrenia. I can give numerous examples like that, but we need to have people focus on these programs as a means of preparing our future.
I think when you look at the fact that most of the social service agencies, whether it's Lutheran Family, Leslie Bates, Children's Home and Aid, we've been a partner with the state for 30, 40 years. And, I think most people would say that the private sector really does a better job than our government in providing services. We do it cheaper, we're more efficient, and we provide a higher quality of services. I think people would argue that in any service area that you work in. We've been a partner with the state. We've raised millions of dollars to try to provide the highest quality of services. And we feel like, the state's just thrown us out. We've been a partner all these years, and they've just said all that doesn't mean anything. Well, the state needs to be a good partner. They need to pay. I know right now, the neighborhood house, we're a part of a lawsuit that we've just filed with 80 of the largest agencies in Illinois called Pay Now Illinois. The sad thing about it is all of us have contracts for all these services that we've talked about. We have signed contracts with the state of Illinois, and they have not lived up to those contracts.
So you've provided services they haven't paid you
right.
for.
So we've really been the state's bank. We've raised our money. All of our agencies have taken lines of credits out. We've lived up to our part of the contract and continued to provide services to the people who we know, if they didn't have services, would probably die. And yet the state has refused to pay us. And so we just 2 weeks ago filed this lawsuit in Chicago called Pay Now Illinois. And we hope that that's going to have an immediate impact in getting the agencies paid. We've already seen some movement with a lot more talk about trying to pass a budget both for 216 and 217. So, our job is to be advocates. Our job isn't to figure out the politics of this and say the governor's right or the Democrats or the Republicans right. Our job is to be the advocate for the poorest and most vulnerable people, you know, in our community, and that's what we're trying to do. But we're calling on the governor and all the legislators, you know, to get a budget passed. That's their job.
Are they hearing you? Are they, because if this is all what you're saying is true, which we'll operate under the assumption that it is, are our politicians ignoring this?
I think they're waiting for one side to crack. And I think that's why you don't hear this public outcry, because we're exhausted. The advocates are exhausted because we've been fighting this battle for a year. And what's happening is that we know that anything we do or say isn't going to impact their decision, because we can't change the governor's mind, we can't change the Democrats' mind, and so we're powerless. But what's happening now, if we don't have a budget on July 1st, it's very different this year than last year. People who had savings, lines of credit, reserves, they're gone. So how much longer are we going to last? And we are particularly challenged in our organization because we have federal pass-through dollars, and those have to have a budget to be appropriated. And if we can't have those appropriated, you know, right away, which this would be the federal year, which would be October, we are doomed. People will close their doors, and there will be no services on this side of the river.
You know, I think about what just happened recently with the legislature just passed about $600 million for the universities. You probably saw that. You know, and part of that money was to help with the MAP grants or financial aid for kids. And that was really important because we had a lot of kids that we were helping graduate from high school. We were able to get them into college, but they needed federal, you know, some type of assistance. There was no assistance, so people started dropping out. Well, when that happened, they finally got around to passing the budget, or to passing, you know, a spending plan just for the universities. And as she said, they've passed one for the universities, they've passed one for the municipalities. They've passed almost 90% of all the money in the state is going out right now, and the only 10% that's not is for programs for the poorest and most vulnerable people in our communities and for social services. And I think you asked that question, why? It's because of the people who don't have a voice. And I think the legislators know that. And so, you know, the universities are powerful. They spoke up, you know, but it's the people who don't have a voice that they're taking advantage of.
Kind of tying in with the universities, we had another comment on Twitter. A person said the Springfield good state government would increase higher education funds so universities can recover from the damage reckless politicians have done. And so jumping back into the arena you're talking about, if they started paying their bills today, is there any expectation they will go back and pay you what they owe you previously? Would they repair what has been lost or damaged, in this person's words?
You know, I think that's been a concern of ours. It's like, we might get the money going forward. Will we get what we're owed? Nobody knows. And this is, if any business would struggle with this kind of uncertainty, and it's becoming very, very challenging for any of us to survive anymore. We're, you know, and you had mentioned, can we increase our private partnerships? That takes time. You can't do it overnight. So building those donor bases and getting that kind of support, that financial support from the private sector is very, very challenging and it takes a long time.
When the public support has been immediately cut off.
Correct.
Well, to answer it differently is, yes, the state's going to pay for it, maybe not necessarily paying it to the agencies, because the effects of not paying it now is going to be carried out for a long time. Bill mentioned the Redeploy program, right? That's a program to reduce recidivism. That program has reduced recidivism by 61%, and currently 23 counties cannot operate that program. So the state is already paying for it indirectly, because $100,000 per kid per year in a juvenile detention cell. So they're paying for it. It's just going to be in not the way that is productive.
But more importantly, the kids and the families are paying for it. You know, those kids who end up being sent away, who are labeled and stigmatized for the rest of their lives, you know, those are the kids who are paying for it. You know, our mothers who are saying, hey, if we don't have an after-school program or a place to put our kids, I'm going to have to quit my job. where am I going to work? There was a big impact on our child care program. They've changed the eligibility, and hundreds and hundreds. You've heard, I guess Amanda pointed out, if people have lost needed child care. So it's already having a big impact, on our kids and our families.
You mentioned that you're exhausted. I can almost see it in your faces. It sounds like you're a little frustrated, to say the least. But are you getting any response? You talk about the folks not having a voice. I'm sure you all are the voice for them. Are you getting any response from the politicians about this, about what we're talking about right now?
Well, our legislators, some budgets have been, as Amanda said, have been passed, and they're on the governor's desk right now to be signed. And so we're hoping, some of our local legislators have worked hard to put back all those dollars and all those monies for those programs, whether they get passed or not. We're a faith-based organization. We're a United Methodist Center. We're asking all of our people to continue to write the governor and the legislators and do whatever they can to be a voice for those who don't have a voice. And we believe it's going to work. So.
And I think when you talk about how the universities were funded, it was really ironic that we had a rally for senior services in Springfield, and it's very difficult to take a frail older adult from Southern Illinois to Springfield for a day to be at a rally. But it was interesting because it was the same day the universities were rallying for support. So they had all these college students, and we had this scheduled rally, and we were so dwarfed by that. Yeah. So, but it's these are the frailest of the frail.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you all for your time. Bill, Joy, and Evan, we appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be back to update with some good news soon. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.